Hello everybody, konnichiwa. As I promised in my last video, today's topic is Tengu. I got inspired by this great artwork from Bez, Triplesix Tattoo. Tiny Mask is a series of handmade masks, and first one contains Hanya, Kappa, Hyotoko, and Tengu. Have you ever seen Tengu before? Do you know what is it? Is there only one Tengu or many? Where do they come from? Today, let's take a look at Tengu. Tengu is one kind of goblin. The term refers to a general term for an entire species, like human, dog, or cat. Among them, there is the long-nosed Tengu, the crow-like raven Tengu, the funny and dodgy little Tengu, and the boss, the great Tengu who unites the many Tengu. They really like us humans when it comes to variety, all shapes and sizes. They appeared in different incarnations throughout over their long history, and each area has its own variety too. This is Tengu in Japanese. Nowadays we read Tengu, but it used to be read Amatsu Kitsune. Tengu was mentioned in 637 AD for the very first time in Japan. This is a historically proven date actually, as a large comet flew from east to west across the sky of Japan, making a thunderous sound. People feared it as a harbinger of something sinister to come. A monk called Ming, who had just returned from study in China, explained the astronomical phenomenon. That's not a comet, it's an Amatsu Kitsune. His barking sounded like thunder. Amatsu means firmament, and Kitsune means more dark than fox in this case. What he meant was flying animal basically. I know it really doesn't look like the Tengu we know yet, right? During the middle of 11th century, the term Tengu appeared in famous novels like Utsuho Monogatari. Is the oldest full-length story in the history of Japanese literature, and it mentions Tengu. The text says that it must be playing a Japanese koto instrument in the mountains. And in the romantic blockbuster Genji Monogatari, Tengu are said to deceive humans, taking them away along with the kodama, which are other spirits of the forest. You might know kodama from the animation movie Princess Mononoke. Even though they weren't described in detail, Tengu then became known as rather small fairies living in densely forested mountains of Japan. Large part of our country were, and still are, covered by mountains full of mysterious woods. And throughout thousands of years, we've been wondering and imagining what creatures would live up there. Soon after, during 12th century, Tengu became an essential character in a collection of stories, the Konjaku Monogatari Shu. Here, Tengu had become associated with the black kite, a kind of bird soaring across the skies of Japan. The flying bird-like Tengu. Interestingly, Tengu began to act as an enemy of Buddhism, misleading and tried to interfere with their training. One example story, Konjaku Monogatari Shu. A Tengu took possession of a woman around 30 years old and arrived at a temple on foot. Borrowing the beautiful body of the woman, the Tengu tried to forcibly seduce a monk, but the brave monk prayed to the Buddha. I guess he prayed really hard, because the woman's body was blown away by invisible force, and her head was repeatedly smashed against a pillar, and the Tengu, who was beating up a pulp, left the temple. Never try to distract a Buddhist monk, right? But think about the woman whose body was taken over by Tengu. Not cool. Obviously, the image of Tengu was used as negative figure in order to propagate Buddhism, almost like a demon or even evil in Christian religion. And probably it's not a coincidence that the bird-like Tengu looks a lot like Garuda, an important god in Hinduism. But don't worry, Not all Tengu are bad, and when the samurai emerged on the picture of historic Japan, the Tengu took a great leap forward, and some very strong Tengu stories were born. Samurai and Tengu. During the age of the samurai, it so happened that a Tengu descended among humans to become a teacher in the martial arts for a young boy. Yoshitsune, the younger brother of Minamoto no Yoritomo, the first shogun of the Kamakura shogunate, allegedly studies the skill of samurai from a Tengu when he was still a child. After this, we hear similar stories more often, and Tengu slowly gained popularity and importance as goblins, and their appearance and abilities became closer to the image we know today. They became more human-looking, in other words. It was said that the Tengu had the body of a man, but with wings that carried him through the sky as quickly as a falcon. Besides, he had the divine power to see 100 years into the future. Scholars and priests with considered minds were said to become Tengu after they died and lived in the mountains all over Japan, expanding their powers as they multiplied in their remote strongholds. The Tengu had come a long way, from dainty fairies to powerful and wise goblins. But besides their shape, the Tengu turned out to have acquired another human character trait. You guess it. Not humility, no, but rather hybris. As they gained power, strength, and reputation, they tried to take over the entire of the world itself. The Tengu had grown in numbers and sheer power that they slowly began to darken the world, attempting to throw the world into chaos. In the Taiheki text, a historical epic tale, we can read that at this time, the Tengu gathered for a meeting to strategize over a way to dominate the known world. Unlike the pitiful tales of the past, the great Tengu had evolved from the soul's emperors and high priests to reincarnate as veritable demon kings. We say that Tengu like fire, fights, and war, and during their meeting, the great Tengu decided to wreak havoc on earth. And history proved them right, as during the Muromachi period, the imperial court was divided into the northern and southern dynasties, which consequently plugged the country into the turbulent period of the warring states. The Tengu watched in amusement from their lairs, while political chaos, starvation, and killing altogether lasted almost 300 years, only to be concluded by Tokugawa shogunate in early 17th century. Was all of this the dark work of Tengu? Humans tend to blame darker forces for their own faults, but something sinister surely had been going on during this time. It is not that the Tengu lived in the mountains in total seclusion. They are often dressed as Yamabushi, people who practice mountain religions. These are aesthetic devotees who studied natural forces and mysticism and gained supernatural powers. As early as 12th century, a collection of stories suggests a deep connection between Yamabushi and Tengu, who share the same territory and became closer and closer to each other, and eventually, in the eyes of the people, blended into one. Humans and demons, united by a dark force. Human assumed Yamabushi dress, an image we know until today. That's the original story of Tengu. From being a pure natural force, they developed human character traits and eventually were said to be responsible for some of the darkest times of Japanese history. Still, there are many shrines in Japan where Tengu are worshipped as gods, and many people nowadays admire them for their power and oftentimes quite fun ways. I will surely tell you more interesting and amusing stories about Tengu in one of my next videos. I also would recommend, if you visit Japan, to go to Takao Mountain in Tokyo. There is a legendary Tengu shrine there with an impressive statue. And you can find out about a long history and the tale of the Tengu. It's a mountain, and you can experience and feel the spirit of the Tengu in its natural environment. If you're lucky, you can see real Yamabushi practice for their festival. It's just a short trip from the center of the city, and I used to go there as a school trip or during New Year's time. I have many more stories and studies of Tengu to share with you. If you'd like to know more about them and some individual stories, please subscribe the channel. Thank you very much for watching today, and see you next one. Bye! またね!